This afternoon, we're going to be talking with Victor Flores, a candidate for lieutenant governor in Oklahoma. Now, it's a crowded field. We're looking forward to seeing how he can differentiate himself from that crowded field in his race to become our next lieutenant governor.
Dr. Flores, tell us about what would lead you to run for public office in Oklahoma?
I am definitely not a career politician. I'm a business owner and I'm a community leader.
So right now you're just a contributor to politicians or to your campaign, not actually getting engaged yet.
Sure.
Well,
sure.
good luck with this for your
Thank you.
first race as lieutenant governor. What do you wish to accomplish?
Well, first I'm gonna take you back in regards to the why. 'Cause I think that the why I'm running is really really important.
Okay.
And so I'm because I'm a business owner. I feel like that I am one of us that is trying to fight for the rest of Oklahoma. Oklahoma is suffering right now. We're 50th in education, which is essentially that's our workforce. We're 49th in healthcare, which that's a major cost, and we're 50th in voter turnout. And those are just a few of the things that we are struggling. But one of my biggest whys is that I travel all across the country, sometimes internationally, and the story of Oklahoma is getting lost. And uh, from the perspective of potential investments coming into our state, we're being left behind. So here's an example. 2 years ago, I was serving as the president of the Asian Chamber. I traveled with Governor Stitt, some state legislature, and some business leaders from all across the state. We went to three different countries. We went to Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan. Japan was of great interest to me. Why? Japan is the largest foreign direct investor in the United States. Back in 2024, almost $864 billion into the US. In 2025, reaching almost $900 billion into the US. So when we met with this large group called candid, which is the top 100 businesses of Japan, they put up the map of the United States. And on each state, it showed how much they were investing in each state. And oddly enough, I was looking at Oklahoma, and everyone around us was beating us. Then I kind of spanned my view, and I was looking all across the country. The only state that we beat was Montana. Kansas is getting 4 times more investments to Kansas than we are. Utah almost 3 times. Kentucky almost twice as much. I wasn't focused on Texas or Florida or New York. I was focused on similar states like us and states close to us. Why was New Mexico and Kansas getting more money, more investments from the largest foreign direct investor than Oklahoma? And that's a question that we all have to ask. And so when I asked one of the Japanese leaders who was a subsidiary of Lexus, thank goodness I knew that Oklahoma was the main reason why one of our major exports is iodine, is because of that subsidiary business that actually reported up to Lexus. And what he told me was that someone from Kansas came over there and they said, "Hey, Kansas is in the middle of the U.S. Invest here, and we could ship your product all across the country." Well, and that is true. They do have Asians there in Kansas, and there was an Asian that told them that, and they are geographically in the middle of the country, but not in regards to transportation, right? And so one of my main pushes is to brand and market Oklahoma as America's crossroads of commerce. Now, why is that? Because if you look at I-35 runs north and south right through Oklahoma. I-44 and I-44 and I-40 the same thing. Route 66 goes from Chicago all the way to LA right through Oklahoma. And if you look at where the furthest most port is into the center of the United States, it's in Catoosa, Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And it goes all the way down to the Gulf of America. And so what does that say is that we are at the center of transportation. And that's not even counting our amazing airports that we have all across our state, as well as rail all across our state. But that's not how Oklahoma is seen. Every time I traveled from New York to California and from Washington to Florida, everywhere I go, they're like, "Hey, Victor, where are you from? You seem to be a pretty fun person." And I tell them, I come from the great state of Oklahoma. And I get one of three responses. Number one, are there still cowboys and Indians? And do you live in teepees? And I'm sure a lot of the viewers hear the exact same thing. Or number two, do you live in a bunker? Because tornadoes, I hear, are running around Oklahoma every other day. Or number three, I'm sorry, Victor, where is Oklahoma? And that's a problem. But, if you think about it, why Oklahoma is known as a state for cowboys and Indians or for Twister is that's how we marketed ourselves. If you think back to Will Rogers, one of our greatest ambassadors, he went all over the world sharing stories about the old Wild West and cowboys and Indians. But, a lot of time has passed since then. And we need to catch up in regards to how we better brand ourselves. And also, do we have tornadoes in Oklahoma? Absolutely. I do not understand why we keep talking about it. And in fact, Oklahoma is no longer the center of Tornado Alley. But do you hear those other states talking about tornadoes? No. We like to film movies about tornadoes. And hey, I love twisters, both of them. But it's not good for Oklahoma. You know what is really tough, because I'm also a part of a group called Global Oklahoma. When we bring ambassadors from 17 different countries here to Oklahoma, our presenters cannot stand up there, which every single one of those folks were actually employees of the state, walked up and said, "Man, I'm sure glad it's not too windy of a day and there's not a tornado." To us Oklahomans, that's funny because we've lived through so many tornadoes. But to strangers, it scares the living daylights out of them. So we have to be mindful how we market ourselves. We have to market ourselves in a positive light. And I promise you, we and all of our businesses and all the people of Oklahoma will rise to the positive image of America's crossroads of commerce.
That's very interesting. Now, could you or could you share a little bit and let us dig into your business background that leads or prepared you for this role?
I have 2 master's degrees. My first master's degree was in finance and in accounting. That was from Oklahoma Christian University. And then my second master's degree was in healthcare administration and accounting. That's from Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas. So the first part of my career was in healthcare, almost exclusively healthcare, finance, business office, on the accounting side. And then one of my leaders for Integra South, Stan Hupfeld, who was the systems CEO, he's obviously retired now, but he was one of those mentors who really invested in me. And he said, "Hey, Victor, I see greater things for you." And he really wanted me to become hospital CEO. Well, that just didn't work out for me. And so I transitioned from a mid-level operations role of a hospital to a CFO, COO role of a large physician group. And then from there, I actually created my first consortium that then led me to tribal healthcare. So I was the CFO for the Absentee Shawnee Tribal Health System there. And after 6 months, they found out I was a genius, which is not true. I just really had to deploy some of the common principles in regards to how to track down some of those healthcare dollars. And then so from there, I went from a health clinic CFO to the tribal CFO and then tribal administrator for one of our tribal nations here in Oklahoma. And then after that, I actually left and I had my own firm. I did that for about a year, and then a large national accounting firm actually picked me up, and they had me assisted leading their national tribal practice. And and so the at the time there were three offices in the country, and I opened up our Oklahoma office because I said I'm not moving to where you're at in Albuquerque or Phoenix or Oregon. I'm staying here, and I'll create an office around me. At which point I did, and so I started our office there, and that was back in 2020. And so now there are six offices, but that company actually represents over 256 tribal nations across the country. And so I was working with with the state government and the tribal government in all those different states, as well as here in ours. I also serve as the president of the Oklahoma Tribal Finance Consortium, and I'm the past chairman of the Oklahoma Native Economic Impact Study. So I'm very well versed in regards to our great tribal nations here in our great state of Oklahoma and the economic impact that they have here in our state. And amongst that, I am an angel investor in six other small businesses here in Oklahoma, ranging from a small law firm practice. No, David, I'm not a lawyer. To a physician practice. No, I am not a physician. To a healthcare billing company. I do know how to do some coding, just FYI, and some billing, and then also tribal finance consulting, and then general finance consulting.
Well, healthcare is certainly a growing field in Oklahoma and in Tulsa. Do you see growth potential? How do you see growth potential within that field to develop here for the state?
Well, I have a different take on healthcare.
Okay.
I have a master's degree from healthcare, and I've worked for a lot of different large health systems here in our state. And the business of healthcare is hurting our country and it's hurting our state.
How so?
Just here in Oklahoma, we actually rank anywhere between 47th to 49th in healthcare. And the reason why that's an issue, even externally to our state, is that if we're trying to attract businesses to come here to our state, they're going to look at a couple of things. They're going to look at the highest cost, which is, cost of living, but they're also going to look at their workforce. That's education, and we're 50th. And then they're also going to look at, well, what's the cost of keeping my employees healthy? That's our healthcare cost. And we're ranking between 47th and 49th. And there's all these different rankings that we fall way too low here in Oklahoma. And so as a CFO for many other companies, it's not going to be very enticing for us to say, hey, your workforce is not going to be that educated, and you're going to have to pay more just to keep your people employed. Now, what I typically hear from a lot of politicians is a positive spin on that. And they say, well, at least Oklahoma has a good cost of living. Well, if you think about it, do you really want people just to live here? We have to demand more.
Yes.
As a state, we deserve more. And as its citizens, we deserve more. And that's why voting matters so much. We have to demand more and say, hey, we're ranking way too low. And what is the government at all levels doing to help fix that? Because that's what that's what your tax dollars is supposed to be doing. Serving the people, not serving itself.
Now, as the lieutenant governor, how would you fix this for Oklahoma?
The reason I chose the role of lieutenant governor is because not only can you be the chief marketing officer for the state, which I have experience in, you also get to be the chief cheerleader for the state. And that's all about bringing people together. Bring people together that we should be working together. We have so many silos here in Oklahoma, we're hurting ourselves. That's why we're dragging low in a lot of metrics. If people travel outside of Oklahoma, you will see that we're being left behind. I mean, and also keep in mind, I'm not saying that Oklahoma is bad. I love Oklahoma, and Oklahoma is doing great in a lot of things, but we're dragging the bottom. We're the weak link to the U.S., and I feel like that a stronger Oklahoma makes a stronger America. So we have to do more, and we have to do better.
So you're saying that because we are siloed, and I assume that that's um, just a way of saying that we are isolated within our points of view. Is that what you mean by silo?
I don't believe it's only points of view. There's the Oklahoma City, Tulsa competition, if you will. There's the urban, and then there's the rural competition. How I see it is that if anyone in Oklahoma wins, the entire state wins, and that's how every Oklahoman needs to see it. It's not a We have to stop competing with ourselves, and we have to come together so that we can compete better with the rest of the country.
Absolutely.
Because investors see that we're not working together. And when the state is fighting with our tribal nations, or when different industries are jockeying for a better position, it doesn't look as strong for the state if we're not coming together to help each other.
I think the vast majority of Oklahomans would agree with you that
Absolutely.
we need to come back. But what I'm saying is I-35 and I-40 are totally free in the state of Oklahoma. I-44 is totally paid between
Right.
Oklahoma City and the border. So that puts Tulsa in the middle without really a significant free road if you don't count 75. So which is one. So
Yeah.
at least we have one escape south. But other than that, we'd like to work a little bit better with the state. But Tulsa seems to have a reputation elsewhere of being able to take care of itself. And so state resources are being distributed elsewhere. Can we rebalance that?
Well, and so number one, the role of the lieutenant governor does not dip into transportation. Other than I do believe that the role of the lieutenant governor should be, hey, how can this state work better together in all areas, whether it's education or transportation? But but um, but on top of that, I do think that it's important that as we brand Oklahoma as America's crossroads of commerce, that we have to make sure that our state is better balanced in that regard.
Very, very good. Now, Tulsa has a significant population of people from Asia. There was a resettlement after the Vietnam War in Arkansas, very close to Tulsa. We were the largest metro area, so they live here. We have a strong community of Chinese and several Chinese Christian churches and other kinds of things. Um, how have you reacted, and how has the reaction been to your campaign from that community in Tulsa?
Well, I would say it's very receptive. But I'm not looking to any one culture to support my campaign. I grew up in rural Oklahoma. I graduated from Enid, Oklahoma, and I still have family there in rural Oklahoma outside of Enid, in fact, in the Deer Creek, Lamont area, and my culture is pretty vast, and I have a lot of ties to people statewide. I think that what we have to focus on is not the color of our skin, but that we're all Oklahoman. But then you can also flip that and say Oklahoma is as diverse as any other state.
Well, the geology shows you that absolutely, from the mountains to the high plateau and plains.
Absolutely.
But you also mentioned in earlier in your comments that there was a divide between urban and rural. How do we overcome that in your perspective?
So I do see that there's been a lot of great opportunities when we're when we're trying to look at commerce in regards to sectors. So the northeast sector, the central sector, northwest, southwest, southeast, and if you look at those regions with as a hub and spoke mentality, then you'll have a better opportunity so that one rural town is not going to be left out in an area. But if you are, if you are focusing so much infrastructure and then so much focus on the schools in an urban area, then the people in the rural communities, and I grew up in a rural community, are not going to have as much opportunity. I will tell you that there's been great strides with our tribal nations, and a great partnership with our tribal nations who are um, almost all exclusively in rural communities, right? And so you have the Cherokee Nation there in Tahlequah. They have a major partnership with Oklahoma State University, and in fact, they have the only medical school that is partnered with a tribal nation, and that is in rural Tahlequah, Oklahoma.
Well, even in urban downtown Tulsa, we greatly appreciate the tribes and their contributions. In Tulsa County and the other counties, Wagner, in the area, we have seen on the ground, on the streets specifically, the improvements that they've made possible. And I think, again, most Oklahomans are delighted when we can work together instead of suing each other for a
Yeah,
change.
yeah. Our tribal nations are are as Oklahoman as we are. And so we have to stop looking at people and separating them from us. We're all Oklahoman. And I'll tell you, Oklahomans have always been great in coming together in a time of disaster. Well, I'm telling you, with our numbers the way that we are, we're in a disaster. And there is no time for infighting. And I don't know why there's ever been a fight with our tribal nations, who has been the greatest asset to our state, and they're never going to leave. They can't leave, right? They're here, and they'll always be here. And so let's, uh, in instead of fighting or ignoring our tribal nations, how about we partner with our tribal nations to make our state that much greater? And I will say that a vast number of Oklahomans across the state do agree with that. You know, I don't want my tax dollars paying for a fight here in the state that we don't need, that actually makes the state look bad. Like, we need to be a united state of Oklahoma, because right now we're not. And I'm telling you, it's hurting our pocketbooks.
How do you see moving Oklahoma forward as lieutenant governor?
So I would see it two things. The number one thing is we have to have a very small, focused time for healing and say, hey, we have to come together and we're going to be better together. And, and we have to do the work to make sure that happens. In the meantime, I actually have started multiple consortiums, whether it's in healthcare or in finance or with tribal nations or economic development. That's what we have to do as a state and as industries, is we have to come together and we have to agree on a direction that we're moving, and we have to have focus groups for healthcare and education so that we tackle those pieces so that we get our numbers raised up high. Now, I am not for politicians or politics driving that. It has to be business and community driving that, not not government. Our state government is already way too fat and it moves slow. Some things have to move at the speed of business. Not everything, but some things do. And in regards to how we market our state, that has to move at the speed of business. If you go to our state website right now, a lot of that information is actually incorrect. When I was recently at the Capitol, it was Film and Music Day there at the Capitol, and and one of their biggest issues, especially in locations, is that on our website today, a lot of those are incorrect. And if we're trying to attract movies to come here, and they're calling that department about a site, well, actually, it doesn't look like that anymore. I also met with the Oklahoma Grape Association, and our wineries all across our state are incredible for tourism. Well, guess what? Only 70% of those wineries are correct. That means 30% are either gone or there's new ones that have popped up. And so we have to do a better job marketing our state, and it has to be focused, not siloed.
Okay, so you would, as Lieutenant Governor, be the overarching umbrella guardian of consistency or continuity in those efforts, those outreach efforts?
I would not use the word guardian. I would use the word cheerleader. And so the role of a cheerleader is really to bring people together, encourage them to work together. That's why we have a state legislature. That's why we have other different departments to kind of oversee that. But we do need a unifier here in our state. And I believe that a cheerleader for our state that is encouraging all industries, that is encouraging urban and rural, that is encouraging tribal nations, municipalities, state, county levels. We have to work better together. That's what we need.
Victor, your talk today has been very inspiring. Thank you very much for taking the time to come in, and look forward to following your efforts during the campaign.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, David. And please make sure to follow me at victor4oklahoma.com or Victor4LTGov on my socials. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you.